It's not an easy answer, but over the past half dozen years or so, there has been some very important human dynamics research and neurobiological research that helps us understand performance capacities for police officers as they deal with folks and may provide a key to earlier intervention and more effective intervention that might reduce the instances of use of force.
And for people talking about this on the news and even us, you coming on as a guest, it's easy for us to discuss it. You have been a police officer, a police chief. You know it's a bit different in a real life application that goes through a police officer's mind out there. How do they stop at a moment of what most of us would call terror out on the streets and stop back and think about reducing force and especially excessive force?
The key to that, I think, is an earlier awareness of the signs of dangerous aggression. Not every sign of tension or sign of agitation is something that is necessarily a precursor to violence against the officer, but an officer who may not be aware of those micro signals might interpret that more broadly as a dangerous situation for him or her, when it may be a situation that is open to what I call neural breaking. Neurologists and psychologists don't like that term, but it's a useful term to me, more so than de-escalation. So early recognition and early intervention to prevent both the citizen who's being contacted and the police officer from their tensions rising to a level where the survival things kind of kick in and the frontal cortex isn't thinking, it's all in the survival part of the brain.
Dr. Hank Johnson, a Democratic congressman, is planning to file legislation. It's called Stop Militarizing Law Enforcement Act. And he's talking about getting rid of some of these things that people perceive as tanks and scenes that are in our streets these days that could look like a scene out of Ukraine or Iraq. Do you agree that demilitarizing police is one way to do this?
If the question is, are we taking away tools that are practical and have a tactical use and application, then I think that's a wrong-headed approach. I think there are ways that we can demilitarize the appearance of some of the tools that are necessary in today's police work. I don't think we want to take away fire trucks that are bigger than are needed. In 90% of the calls, we don't want to take away their scary gas masks or their oxygen tanks and say, hey, you ought to do it like they did back in the 1950s, wear your raincoat and your pretty red hat into a fire. It's protective gear. It's not offensive in terms of its purpose. So I think it's kind of misguided. And the reason that we have military surplus gear is you can go out and get an MRAP that was used in combat or intended for use in combat for $500 and get it in service as an armored vehicle, or you could go buy one that's specifically designed for policing. It doesn't look so military and maybe paint it blue or lavender or something other than green. But that's going to cost you $100,000. So part of it's economics.
Well, I was talking to the wife of a state trooper who was pretty emotional about this once, and she said that these things are called Bearcats. That people refer to them as tanks, and they're not that. And that she would rather have her husband, who is law enforcement, in one of those vehicles that are armored, bullet resistant, than in his patrol car.
Well, absolutely. Police officers who are going into a known high-risk situation where there are potentially high-caliber weapons being used, you need that kind of cover. I'm from a rural area, and we recently, within the last couple of years, were able to rescue a parole officer who was under fire in a rural area with a armored personnel type vehicle, and bring that situation to a good resolution. That simply wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't had what people think is an unnecessary piece of armament. It was a very practical vehicle and put to good use, life-saving use.
Dr. Schultz, you'll be in mid-Missouri next week, the week after, and you have a seminar. Is that available only to law enforcement, or is that open to media? Is it open to the public?
I'm certainly available to talk with folks. It'll be a closed session for law enforcement only. We need to have, as part of that training, a very frank discussion about some of our attitudes and some of the language that we use in explaining ourselves to the media. We used to be able to say, well, it's just a rotten apple when there was an abuse or corruption case, and that's still true, but But the public has been led not to believe that. So we can't use that argument anymore. We used to be able to say, well, I put my life on the line every day and that ought to count for something. And that's still true, but the public's not buying that anymore either. So that has to stop being part of our explanatory or defensive language. And we need to be proactive in making sure that people understand what we do and the tools that we need to do it.
Dr. Joel Schultz, thank you so much for joining us. I hope it's a packed house for you.